Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to session 81 of the Harborne Islamic Study Circle Seerah session. So we've been doing that for some time. Firstly, to start off with, just thanks for people for sending in useful comments and questions about the session. So from last week, I had a couple of questions, and they were essentially one we talked about. The different characteristics between boys and girls at birth, and the response that Prophet ﷺ gave to Abdullah bin Salam, who was the leading rabbi at the time, leader of the Jewish people, and he basically described the characteristics, whether they're from the male or the female. It depends on what comes first. And again, we have to recognize that the answer is in relation to the people of the time. So the Prophet ﷺ is giving an explanation that people can understand, which is in line with the truth, because he was told the answer by Jibreel, who informed him just prior to Abdullah bin Salam asking him the questions. So the answer is, as I say, something that can be comprehended by the people of the time, but it is also something that we can then interpret with our better understanding of genetics, the human genome, DNA, chromosomes, how the female or the male characteristics tend to predominate once a child is in the womb and then at birth. So that was one question. And likewise, we discussed this before in the process. He went on the night journey, and certainly with the night journey, he was seeing things here which were extra dimensional. They were phenomenal. They were things that no human eye has probably ever seen before. And then he has this difficult task of, when he's coming back to the desert Arabs in Makkah, explaining to them in a language they can understand what he actually saw with his own eyes. So there is that translational element in terms of what he knows and understands and sees, and how he can phase that to us in a language we can comprehend. If he got too technical, then obviously it wouldn't mean anything to people there. But obviously he needs to stick to the truth, and he can't just make things up. Another question was around the treaty and the obligations around the Muslims. It's whether or not, if Muslim, there was the main element of the treaty for the Muslims were that they are one ummah, one nation of believers, to the exclusion of everything else, just based on their belief in Tawheed. One was around looking after themselves and sort of extending that tribal welfare system until they get other systems in place. So it's your own family and tribe that have a responsibility for you. And then if the other thing was, if a Muslim does wrong or does some oppression, then all the Muslims should unite against that individual. And just because they're a Muslim doesn't give them a free pass for anything. Just because they're from a high lineage, just because they're very rich, just because they're got certain previous baggage with them, that means nothing. If there's clear oppression, the Muslims should unite on the truth. So those were some of the main elements of the treaty regarding the Muslims. And one of the other ones was that whether or not they can help their family and help to non-Muslims. The question was, are people allowed to help non-Muslims even if they're their own family? Again, it depends on the context, and if the family are non-Muslim, then you have family obligations. But if the family is plotting against the state, plotting against the Muslims, then you are not allowed to support that. And again, we'll discuss some of those terms later on. So thank you for those questions. Again, keep the questions coming in. Inshallah, I'll try to answer them. Obviously, we can't do this live, but certainly we can develop those themes. If you do have any specific questions, so you can write in, you can email, or drop a note to myself, or on the website, and or on the YouTube, and inshallah I'll pick it up for the next session. So today it's just carrying on with the Constitution. Excuse me. It's just carrying on with the Constitution, the agreement of the Prophet ﷺ when he came into Medina, and it's about how he demonstrates his leadership, how he's projecting himself and moving forward in building the society. So we talked about the different types of people involved. There were the articles in the Constitution, or the mandate, or the agreement regarding the Muslims. There are those clauses regarding the Jews, and those clauses regarding the idol worshippers or the pagans. And then there are other general clauses for everyone as a community. So we just ticked off the first one last time. So regarding the Jewish tribes, which were sort of the main powerhouses at the time, they themselves weren't united. There were three main tribes, but even all of them had sub-tribes themselves. But the Prophet ﷺ, he said that, and he gave them in writing, that the Jewish tribes themselves are one ummah along with the believers. So again, seeking to work with the Jewish tribes, wanting them on his side, and saying basically you have a similar status as the ummah of the Muslims, you are your own believers. And again, focusing the status, the bond, primarily around their belief. And we talked about the importance of that before. So it is important that they unite around their common beliefs and values. And again, when we look at how societies are formed, it makes more sense to have your main bond on your shared values, your shared understanding, your shared way of doing things, and that generally comes from your beliefs and values. And for Muslims, primarily that is their belief in Islam. And again, for other people, other nations, it's around that particular aspect, what brings them together. And merely bonding on the fact that you're from a certain family, or that you're born in a certain place, and somehow that soil in that land confers some special powers that unites the people and gives them some superiority. I mean, if you actually think about it, it does not make sense. That there's something specific in the soil, in the water, in the air of that geography that confers some really extra powers to a particular type of people who are reared in that way. So it makes more sense around defining communities around your beliefs. So again, so the Jewish tribes are one ummah alongside the believers. They should take care of their own internal affairs and disputes. Again, very important. So essentially giving them a degree of autonomy, semi-autonomy, in terms of that basically they can look after their own rules, their own disputes. You know, they have quite a flexibility around how they administer their own rules and regulations. But there are some exceptions, the main exception being if there is a dispute between people from the Jewish faith and people from the Muslim faith, that is then referred to the higher court, which is the Prophet ﷺ. And the other obligation on them regarding internal affairs, partly external but mainly internal, is they should not assist the enemies of the Muslims. So if there are issues, certainly externally facing, or even sedition forces within the society, the Jewish tribe should not assist those people in any way, shape or form. They should remain out of those things. And again, we'll see how that panned out, but initially it just makes sense. You're part of the society, you're part of the community, you deal with your own affairs, but don't work to undermine the society and what there is here. And then linked to that, if the people of Medina are attacked, then the Muslims have an obligation to defend, and the Jewish people have an obligation to defend equally. So it's not done on any one more than the other. It's everyone needs to band together and have their sense of protecting Medina. It's their city after all. So it's written in writing that there needs to be clear banding together, mutual support around repelling any external threats to the city. Another couple of minor things is that no Jewish person is allowed to leave Medina without the permission of the Prophet ﷺ. They can leave if they really want to, but leaving in those days, it's not leaving for trade. Leaving for those days essentially meant you are renouncing your citizenship, your right to live in that place, and you're basically going away and taking up residence, full-time residence in some other place. And finally, no Jewish people are allowed to convert to Islam, and it's there in writing that basically, if people once they see Islam being practiced, recognize its beauty, and want to become Muslims, they are perfectly allowed to convert. So here you can see in the main aspects of the Constitution, there's nothing around anti-Semitism. There are rights and obligations. There's no form of discrimination. It's actually giving them quite an esteemed status. And obviously, if the Jewish tribes at the time kept to the agreement, then they would really have become quite a considerable force in the early Muslim state. They could easily have been co-opted into a lot of the prominent decision and economic making fora, and they would have prospered as a community. But we'll see later on in the coming weeks and months how they went back on some of these agreements, but they all initially agreed and acquiesced and signed up to this constitution. So they were the rules around the Jewish people. Again, just reiterating, it's basically they're one nation amongst themselves of believers, alongside the believers. They should take care of their own affairs and their own disputes, except when there's a dispute between Jews and Muslims, and they shouldn't assist the enemies of the state. They should mutually support the Muslims when attacked by enemies, and no one is allowed to leave without the express permission of the Prophet ﷺ. And if they want to convert to becoming Muslim, they're freely allowed to. So again, fairly straightforward, and again, forming a basis of rules and regulations based primarily on faith, on your belief, on your values and systems, and that's again just reiterating that point. And again, moving on to the other people, talking about the idol worshippers, the mushrikeen, the pagans. And again, we said that there is still a significant minority of people left in Medina who are idol worshippers, who have not who are Arabs, have not embraced Islam, and they are stuck in their old ways. And they continued to practice, certainly within the first year or so, in Medina. It was only after the Battle of Badr that essentially virtually all of them became Muslim, or outwardly Muslim. And we know a significant proportion of those people became the group of hypocrites, or the munafiqeen, led by Abdullah ibn Ubay. But there was a realization after the Battle of Badr that actually, as mushrikeen, as idol worshippers, they cannot significantly function within Medina, because the Battle of Badr was such a monumental one-sided victory for the Muslims, and cemented their rule and authority, gave pride to the Muslims, that the idol worshipper said, well, this isn't just collectively, they knew that they had to change the way they did things. So many of them were convinced by the truth and genuinely became good Muslims and supported Islam, but a significant minority then became munafiqeen, and that's when we get the verses in the Quran of how to deal with the hypocrites, because they are a significant, proportion of people, disruptive people, influential people, rich people, who want to undermine Islam, who want to create fitna, who want to create disunity, who want to create Muslims arguing amongst themselves. And that was their game plan, because they just saw this as a fad. Islam would come and go, and then they take back control. They wanted to make Yathrib great again, but this was the only way they could do that. So some of the rules, similar rules that we have for the Jewish people, but other significant ones are that no mushrik, pagan idol worshipper, is allowed to give protection to the Quraysh, even if it's around money or their life possessions. So it's it's saying that basically the Quraysh are the sworn enemies of the Muslims. They are the sworn enemies of the state. The Quraysh want to wipe Medina off the face of the earth. They want to get rid of the Islamic State in Medina. They are mortal enemies of the state. So obviously anyone who is in any significant alliance with the Quraysh, that's not going to be accepted. And they're told that they should not interfere in matters between Makkah and Medina. Explicitly it's written down. And again, that's significant because, as I said, these are enemies of the state. These are people who are working, the Quraysh, to overthrow the government of Medina, to discredit and essentially kill the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ, and take things back to how they were before that. So because the Quraysh are external to Yathrib and Medina, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, look, all matters related to the Quraysh, this is external affairs, this is foreign affairs. You leave this to the Muslims, you leave this to the Prophet ﷺ, and he will deal with it. The the mushrikeen need to stay out of that. They're not allowed to get into any alliances and protection. So these are some of the specific things around there. And again, one of the things that I may not have mentioned last time was around the giving protection. Prophet ﷺ said that any Muslim can give protection to anyone else who wants to come in to Medina. So again, it's elevating that status of all Muslims are equal. Anyone, even if it's a child who understands what they're doing, an older child, they are allowed to give protection. But this is not the job and the role of the other groups in Medina. So again, so that's that. So there we've talked about the constitutional elements regarding the Muslims, regarding Jewish people, regarding the pagan idol worshippers, and again, the actual treaty that's written down goes through these obligations tribe by tribe, and it's a very long document. If you do actually read it in the books of Seerah, Ibn Sham, Ibn Sa'd, it's a very long document because we don't even know a lot of these tribes. And again, I've read some of the things, and it just names the tribe, where they're from, and then stipulates these things for each of the tribes. So they're the main people that were there in Medina at the time. Yes, there were free people and bondspeople, slaves, but the rules weren't specific to them because they said you have your own beliefs. So it's not about that status, it's not about the wealth you have, it's not about the particular part of Medina you're from, your ancestry. It's about your beliefs. And then there are general rules around the whole community. So not just looking at your specific obligations around your specific obligations based on your faith, but there are general society wide rules and regulations. Excuse me. So there you have the Prophet saying that he's now designating the city of Medina as officially being a sacred land, as being a haram, being holy. Just like the people, the Quraysh understood this, the Muhajirin, the Ansar, the Mushrikeen, all of them understood this concept of some land being sacred because they used to go for Hajj, or they grew up in Makkah. So he's saying, like you have this concept of a haram, something being sacred, we must now understand that Medina is now sacred, and it sanctifies the land, so everyone understands this. And he designated particular points on the map that everyone understood. Between here, everything between these points, it's sacred land, it's a haram, and all the rules and regulations around some land being sacred need to be observed here as you observe them in Makkah. So issues around no hunting, no carrying of open weapons, you can't walk around with your sword unsheathed, no randomly cutting down of trees, things like that. Okay. So the particular sort of land is sacred in itself, and there are rules and regulations, and they were well understood by everyone. And linked to that people are safe in Medina. Again, it's writing it down there in black and white. The people, they come to Medina in the sacred area, they are deemed to be safe. So it's like a sanctuary. Okay, so again, it's protecting the ground. There should be no bloodshed within this particular area. And again, reiterating the point that we said before, that if there are people who rebel or renegade or the enemies of Islam, they should not be helped by anyone in the community. And if these disputes should be referred to Allah and His Rasul to decide on all of these disputes. So again, just laying down the foundation that actually now, the highest authority is Allah and and His Rasul. And obviously, we know the Prophet does not talk of his own accord in terms of rules and regulations. Whatever he delivers in terms of how we should live is wahi, is revelation. So everything is linked to that. So the designation of the sanctity of Medina, the safety and sanctuary there, and no helping of any rebels and renegades, and that the highest law of the land is the Quran and Sunnah, Allah and His Rasul. So again, with these four principal elements in terms of the Constitution, rules regarding the Muslims, the Jewish people, the Pagans, and general society, what we see the Prophet is doing is, again, it's really far-sighted. He's writing things down on paper. He's making a public declaration. All the leaders, all the elders, all the main people in society are there. They're agreeing to this. They're acquiescing to this. This now forms the bedrock of societal interactions, how people interact. Okay, so we talked before about the challenges involved in the process of building a new society, setting up almost a society from scratch. That people have an understanding of some of the basics of Islam, but this is actually putting flesh on the bone. So it is building the society, and again we can see there is a methodical approach to the Prophet in terms of how he builds the society. So for the first 3 years of his prophethood, he did some private dawah, handpicked people that he he thought, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and others thought would be receptive to the idea of Islam, they would privately invite them to Islam, explain Islam to them, and they would have private halaqah to learn about Islam. And then when a small group of them had formed, they were then able to move into society. The Prophet was told, now you should go and proclaim openly. And then we saw how the Prophet, he was proclaiming openly to the people of Makkah, day in, day out, day and night, about Islam, and criticizing the values within the society in Makkah, and saying Islam is the alternative. And then because of that, the Prophet got some backlash and torture and boycott, and some people were sent away to Abyssinia. But the approach was one of just telling people what Islam was about. And then later on, after the boycott had ended, the Prophet then was commanded to seek support and try to establish Islam somewhere else, hence his visit to Taif and offering himself to the tribes. And then the support came from completely unknown quarter, Yathrib at the time, 6 people, and then the first pledge of Aqaba of 12, and then 72 plus 2 at the second pledge. And now he's entered into Medina after the Hijrah as ruler, as leader, and he's now having to, he's new to people don't even know what he looked like. He's having to build a society based around his ideas that he's been preaching for all these years. And people want to see results. People want to see results straight away. Whether it's the first 100 days or the first year, they like to see change. They want to know what's different. And that's the process of what he was doing. He's bringing about a new way of doing things, a revolutionary understanding of life and relationships for yourself and in the community. So building this society around belief, around Tawheed, around Islam, we see that the very first thing the Prophet did was to build the masjid. And again, that's about how you can implement your belief practically. Praying is the most important thing. So it's focusing people that actually really important is your relationship with your belief in your God, and that the masjid as the communal place to do that of all social interactions. And then so that's the practical application of your Tawheed, and then a manifestation of your Tawheed is the brotherhood that comes with it. So it's the bonding between people, and then we saw how the Prophet he physically paired people up to be brothers to each other, and so creating this sense of brotherhood and unity between people and getting them to think alike and start to love each other. And now we've got aspects of communal rules and regulations and the stipulations of how things should run, and setting out an order around these things. So we can see these sort of major projects that the Prophet did as soon as he got there. The masjid, the brotherhood, the constitution, the rules around that. And again, we can get a sense of his sense of leadership and ruling in that. And again, we talked before how he's been invited to Medina, or Yathrib at the time, and he's invited there, and he's invited as a leader, as a ruler. He didn't come as a refugee. He came to rule. He came to take over. He came to implement the law of Allah. He came to set up, as some people would say, the kingdom of God on earth. And what we mean by the kingdom of God on earth is the rules and regulations that God wants us to live by. So the authority for ruling, the sovereignty, belongs to Allah. And by implementing the rules of God, the Quran and Sunnah, what you get is the kingdom, essentially the kingdom of God on earth, the rules and regulations that Allah wants us to live our life by. That is what he needed to do. That was his purpose, that was his mission, that was how he was going to do it. And then, as anyone knows who's been involved, sort of working even at school, one thing that we find nowadays is that we're living in an age where things are constantly changing. Things are constantly being updated and modernized, and the only constant that we find in our lives is the fact that things are changing. Okay, there you had societies that had been together for generations, hundreds of years, without any significant structural change. Now the Prophet ﷺ is bringing about wholesale structural change, revolutionary structural change. So in order to do that, he needs to get people to buy into what he's trying to do. So he's outlining in these early few weeks and months his vision of what society should be like. And it's not just any, and we've got stories of him going around from people to people, tribe to tribe, and explaining to them what Islam is about. And we know that Musab ibn Umair was there for a year explaining Islam, proselytizing, getting people to like the idea of Islam. So it's first of all setting up the vision of, well, like, this is where we want to be. This is what Islam is. This is our objective, and now he's practically setting up a roadmap of how to achieve that objective. Again, this is great leadership. So he's engaging all aspects of society, all sections of the community. Here you had the main people in the community, and he addressed them all: the Muslims, the Jewish people, the pagans, and society as a whole. And he's giving them a clear destination, a clear vision of where they want to be. What is it to be living in an Islamic society? He's giving them a core message that they can focus around, and this new society has its unique selling points, has its aspects that they can coalesce around. It gives them pride in terms of what they are. And with any significant change, you're going to get different people when you try to bring about that change. You're going to get certainly what some modern management theorists call, you get your early adopters, you get your people who are neutral, you get your people who are resistant, and then you get the people who lag behind a bit. So certainly you've got those early adopters here in terms of the Muhajirin, the people who came from Makkah. Obviously that's the reason they came, is because they want to live under Islam. You've got the Ansar, the Aus and the Khazraj, again, who are the ones who are from Medina, who've invited him in, who want to see that change, and they're forcing that change. Okay, so these are the early adopters, these are his early supporters, and they are quite fervent and active in promoting this vision and getting people to buy into it. And that is quite key, and part of this whole strategy, building the mosque, setting up the brotherhood, and this constitution, is being very clear around where they want to go, and forming that new society of values and rules. And then writing this down brings around this element of transparency, again, which is key. If you want to do things, you have to do things in an open and transparent way, and that's what the Prophet ﷺ is doing. He's not just doing it behind closed doors with a few people. Okay, he's not setting up his own private WhatsApp groups or his own private Facebook pages, and there's a closed group that they just know amongst themselves, and they're secret handshakes. This is very open. This is very public. Everyone needs to be on board. Everyone needs to buy into this. Okay, and so they're sending out these messages. He has a clear communication strategy, how to engage with people, how to explain what Islam is about, how to get them to buy into this idea. So you've got the early adopters, and then in any society you have these people, when it comes to change, who are neither here nor there. And when we talk about society, again, when the Prophet, he was there in Makkah, preaching Islam here in Medina, you can see his approach to society is quite illuminating. And certainly he tells us, the definition of society in Hadith Seerah, where he talks about where you've got a boat, you've got a few people on the top deck of the boat, and you've got a lot of people on the bottom deck of the boat, and the people on the top deck, whenever they need to have water, they need to ask the people of the bottom deck for water. Or is it the other way around? I can't remember. No, it's the other way around. So the people at the bottom of the boat always need to ask the people at the top deck, and they think to themselves, well, rather than bothering the people on the top deck, why don't we just drill a hole in the boat and we get access to our own water? And then obviously if the people on the top deck don't stop them, they all perish. And that's the concept of what a society is. It's people working together. It's having these shared values, these shared understandings and beliefs that bind you together as a society. Okay, it's not a collection of individuals that, for example, the capitalists say society is essentially made up of a collection of individuals. It's not what the communists and the Marxists say in terms of where they elevate the community as being above everything else, so much so that you lose the individual. No, what the Prophet is saying, again, it's the middle way, is that you have a community, a society based on individuals working together with common beliefs and values and bonds. So the Prophet, he's addressing these things directly in how he's both preaching and trying to change society, because you can't change society unless you understand what society is and how it functions. So all of the way he engaged with the people in Makkah, we see he's got this deeper understanding of how to try to reform society, how to address people in society, and that's what he's doing here in Medina in terms of the implementing change, having a transparent way of getting his views across, knowing how, explaining to people how what their rules, rights and obligations are, having a deliberate communication strategy with specific people embedded within the different parts of the community to explain all these things and cascade all these rules and regulations down, all these understandings. And it's a two-way thing, and they're the people who are delegated to receive information and feed it back to Prophet. So we talked about the early adopters, then we talked about those neutral people in society. Essentially, they just want to do their own thing. They'll go with the flow, so long as it's not having any too significant impact upon their day-to-day living. They're still eating, drinking, going to work, right? They just go with the flow. They're like the driftwood in the water, as you were. They're just happy to be carried along, okay? And they have no significant stake either way. They were content with the old system. They'll give the new system a go. Seems okay. So they're sort of neutral. Let's wait and see. And then you've got those people who lag behind any change. They just hold on to their sort of heritage, how they used to do things, and for that, that's important. That gives them comfort. That gives them a way of, gives them some sort of value, is their hitherto routine. That's how they like to define themselves. So any threat to that, they don't like, and they really drag their heels in terms of making that change. Okay, they'll get there in the end, but often kicking and screaming. And then you've got those people who are active resistors, who take it beyond the laggards, as it were. They actively don't want things to change. They prefer the status quo. They've invested in the status quo for whatever reason, and so they feel threatened by any change, and they actively work against the change. They're not neutral, they're not laggards, they actively work to undermine the change. And we see this later on with the munafiqeen. They are actively working to undermine the Prophet ﷺ undermine the Muslims and to cause discord within society. And whenever you implement any form of change, you will get these people as well. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he has a strategy on how to deal with all of these groups of people, and he's aware of that. And we'll see that in the coming weeks and months, inshallah, how he addresses the challenges of dealing with the resistors and the munafiqeen and the slow adopters, those people who get lagged behind. And it's, the neutral people, they come along because they see the benefits of Islam, they see the beauty of Islam, the justice of Islam, the way it's implemented, how everyone benefits, and then they start to become fully fledged and immerse themselves in Islam and be propagators. Okay, so again, we're seeing here how the Prophet ﷺ is using this constitution to cement his authority, the authority of Muslims and of Islam in society. And it's critical. It goes along with the issues of brotherhood, it goes along with creating the masjid and defining rules and regulations around your belief, which is why it is so important to have a strong belief and know what you believe. Don't do things because your parents used to do it. Don't do things because that's the way it's always been done. Don't do things because everyone else is doing it. The obligation is for every one of us to understand things for ourselves. Okay. Oftentimes, modern day, our some of our masajid, our leaders in the mosque and imams, don't have the language to be able to convey that properly, but it is still our obligation to do it. Okay. And again, so if you've got any, and inshallah we'll talk about these, in a few weeks' time when we start the basics of belief and how to believe and believing in Allah and the Quran and things like that. But again, if you do, and we'll finish there. If you do have any questions, of course, email them in, WhatsApp them in, put them on Facebook, or just send the questions or comment, and inshallah we'll address it later on. So until next time, that's the end of this session. And next time, inshallah, we'll be talking about the next major tumult within the society, which was the changing of the Qibla, inshallah, and why that was so significant, and why that caused such a problem at the time. But until next time, inshallah, Assalamu alaikum. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.